What is up, my friends, and how's it going? And welcome back to the third episode of our Factional Overview guide with your fellow comrade Summary. In today's episode, we will be going through the Bactrian faction and all of the units that are available to it. And of course, as per the 5 sections of the guide, we will be going through the roster available to the Bactrian faction, as well as my recommended army composition, how to fight in the battles using this composition, and we will be looking at the viable Mercenary and AOR options in the 4th section. And in the final section, of course, we will be going through my personal recommendations for general skills as well as army traditions. So without any further ado, let us hop on to the custom battle menu and have a quick look at the Bactrian roster. And as you can see, it will take more than just a quick look because the Bactrian roster is massive. In fact, it is such a well-rounded roster that I like to call it the Seleucid Empire of the East, because like the Seleucids in the game, the Bactrians have access to a variety of different types of units. However, let us hop on to the first section of the guide, in which I will be analyzing each of the stats of these individual units, and I will let you know my personal thoughts and recommendations of these units, and which units are worth it in my opinion and which units are not worth it in my opinion. However, this is subjective, of course, and if you have any suggestions, then I do encourage each and every single one of you to leave your opinions down in the comment section below. However, without any further ado, let us hop into the custom battles, where we will analyze each and every single unit. Alright everybody, welcome to the first section of this guide, in which we will be going through each and every single individual unit available to the Bactrian roster. And as you can see over here, I have arrayed my army into that typical formation, with general in the front row, melee infantry behind, spear infantry behind them, phalanx infantry behind, missile infantry behind them, and then we have our melee or shock cavalry, as followed by our missile cavalry, and finally we also have access to elephant units, which I consider to be special units, along there with chariots, but we don't have access to chariots. Regardless, as you can see, and this is why I call Baktria the Seleucids of the East, and that is because they have a wide variety of units to choose from. In each and every single department, you have quite a lot of melee units, a decent amount of spear units, maybe few phalanx units, but don't let that fool you, because as you will see, these phalanx units are quite respectable in terms of stats. They have a plethora of missile infantry, quite a lot of melee and shock cavalry, as well as missile cavalry, and to top it all off, they even have access to special units, and in fact that is 2 elephant units. However, without any further ado, let us hop into the first category, which is the general category. And the first unit we are going to discuss over here is the Yavanna Guard, which is pretty much a hoplite unit with a very eastern look to it, with the face mask as well as these branches on the back, which is something that you will see a lot of in the Bactrian visuals. However, these hoplites, they're very respectable. They have a melee attack of 9, melee defense of 19, which isn't all that much in comparison to some of the more elite hoplite generals available, such as the Spartan Royal Guard, as well as the Royal Guards available to the Antigonids. However, it's not too bad either, and their weapon damage is actually pretty good. It's the highest entry at 30 overall, with 26 being base damage and 4 being melee armor penetration damage. They also have a respectable armor at 38, and really good bonus versus elephants and cavalry. However, when it comes to generals, I do not recommend infantry units if you can afford to do so, or if it is available to your faction. I always suggest to go for mobility with your general, so that you can move your general around to troubled areas in the battleground and turn the tide of the battle. And speaking of mobile options, you do have 2 options, 2 cavalry options. The first one being the Greco-Bactrian Noble Cavalry. Now these guys are available in the early game. They are fairly generic shock cavalry unit with 15 melee attack, 6 melee defense, a good charge bonus of 60, a good overall weapon damage of 33, 4 of which, as you can see, is armor penetration, And as you can see, they don't have a lot of melee defense. It's only at 6, so I wouldn't recommend using these guys in a prolonged melee engagement. Rather, I would recommend to use them as cycle charge units, because they do have that good charge bonus and good mass overall, so they can deal a lot of damage on the charge. However, if you let them stay in a melee confrontation, they will start to take casualties fairly quickly. Apart from that, they have slightly above average armor for a shock cavalry unit at 41. Their speed, however, is not that fast, and that is understandable considering they really come with some heavy armor. Next up, we have the Greco-Bactrian late cavalry, which is pretty much an upgrade to its predecessor. And it is also a shock cavalry unit, but it is a hybrid horse archer shock cavalry unit in the sense that it also has bows and arrows with which it can fire, and it's got good missile damage at 17, whereas a majority of the horse archer units have missile damage at around 16. So it's pretty good as far as its ranged ability is concerned. However, when it comes to the melee ability, it is slightly inferior to its predecessor. As you can see, it only has 13 melee attack as opposed to 15, 5 melee defense as opposed to 6. Its charge bonus is 51 versus 60. And of course, weapon damage wise, it is about the same, and it does have slightly more armor. However, you might ask, is it really worth it to upgrade them since the melee abilities have been slightly diminished? And in my opinion, and in my personal preference, I think it is worth it, because I typically don't tend to use my general very offensively, because I do not want to risk my general dying in the middle of a battle, as that can really turn the tide of the battle. I like to use my general from afar, and I only ever use him in dire circumstances, and that is because I kind of play like a Roman, in which I only use the generals when it is absolutely needed, not like Hellenics, who were more, I would say, proactive as generals, and oftentimes that resulted in disaster for them in the battlefield, with the exception, of course, of Alexander the Great, who was just phenomenal. So the reason I would recommend the missile general unit is because they can still be relevant in the battle and can still contribute to the battle from a relatively safe distance from the enemy unit, and therefore you won't really be risking your general. As far as speed is concerned and mobility is concerned, they have about the same mobility at about speed 6, so it's really up to you, but personally I would give the edge to the Greco-Bactrian late cavalry unit. However, moving on to our next section, we have the melee infantry, and our very first option is the Bactrian hillmen. Now these guys are 300 men strong. They do come from population class 3, however they have really horrible stats in my opinion. The melee attack is only 5, which is terrible, and the melee defense is at 6, which is again quite terrible, especially for an infantry unit. They are extremely squishy and they can't really dish out a lot of damage. They do have respectable armor penetration, however, so if you are using them as flanky units, they can rack up some kills, but they will not be so effective because, keep in mind, again, they have really low melee attack. Apart from that, they also have very low armor, in fact the lowest armor rating at 1, because you can't have 0, which means they are incredibly squishy. So I wouldn't really recommend using these units unless, of course, you want to get rid of your third class population in the early game and kind of use these guys as fodder for the enemy archers or missile units, so as to preserve your more elite and expensive and not so easily available troops. However, moving on to the next option, we have the Bactrian assault infantry. Now these guys are also from the third class population. They do have 300 men per unit like the Bactrian hillmen, and their stats are just marginally better in comparison to the Bactrian hillmen. They do have 9 melee attack, 8 melee defense. However, their weapon damage is actually inferior in comparison to the Bactrian hillmen, and their armor is not all that much better. So once again, I don't really recommend these kind of units, but the thing about these units, especially the Bactrian assault infantry, is that they are really, really good against elephant units. As you can see, they have a bonus of 34 versus elephants, so these guys can really, really support your cavalry in taking down enemy elephant units. 34 bonus versus elephants basically means your melee attack is 9 plus 34, which is basically 43 melee attack versus elephants, and your weapon damage, which is 21 plus 7, a total of 28. And if you add the 34, you're looking at 62 weapon damage, which is also incredible. So these guys are going to be really good anti-elephant units, and they do come from population class 3, so you don't really care if the elephants are wreaking havoc on these guys. So if you are facing a lot of elephants in your campaign, I would recommend getting these guys, as they are a very cost-effective unit that counters elephant units. However, moving up onto our next unit, we have the Greco-Bactrian late assault infantry, which is pretty much an upgrade of the earlier variant, and I believe these guys are unlocked during the Turios reforms, if not the Thorax reforms. And forgive me if I get the reforms wrong, and that is just because the Bactrian roster is massive, so it's hard to keep a track of what units get unlocked when. However, if you have any doubts, you can hop onto the Divide et Impera website and pretty much look at the rosters and under which reforms they get unlocked. But I do believe these guys get unlocked in the Turios reforms. Now, they're pretty much similar to its predecessor. They do have slightly better melee abilities, even better melee, damage, weapon damage at 30. And of course, they retain that bonus versus elephants at 34. And their armor is starting to get respectable at 15. So these guys are actually quite good. On top of that, they even have a javelin, which is also very good against large units like elephants and cavalry. So definitely would recommend getting these guys if you have to counter a lot of elephants in your campaigns. Next up, we have the Mauryan warrior guildsmen. Now, these guys come from the 4th population class. They are the foreign population class. They represent the Mauryan warriors that were recruited by the Greco-Bactrian kingdoms of that eventually ruled over the Punjab region of India. And a fun fact, they were the last sovereign Greek nation until the modern day Greece that we know of today. So pretty much these guys are quite good in that they come from the 4th class population. They're only 200 men per unit. They have respectable melee attack of 13, melee defense of 11, a good weapon damage of 30, and armor is pretty decent at 30 as well. So these guys are quite good, and they will be very useful in a siege, because when you're sieging foreign territory, especially wall settlements, you need some melee troops to scale the walls, since they do have a bonus while fighting on the ramparts. And you don't really care if they take a bunch of casualties, because it's very easy to replenish 4th class population units, especially if you're conquering foreign culture territory. So these guys are quite good. However, they are not available in your military buildings, keep in mind. As the Bactrian faction, you do get access to a building chain within your civic centers, which is pretty much the Buddhist civic chain. And that does give some influence to Buddhism in your provinces. However, it also unlocks some of these Indian units, such as the Mauryan warrior guildsmen. Moving up to the next unit, we have the Scythian settlers. And the Scythian settlers, they're quite good. They have a melee attack of 9, a melee defense of 11. But what's important about them is that their overall weapon damage is at 33, with 14 being melee armor penetration damage. They do have a very decent bonus versus elephants as well. 20 armor and 4 javelins. Keep in mind, 4 javelins, that's a total of 800 javelins, because you have 200 units times 4, that's 800. Which means these guys are going to be quite good against elephant units as well. And yeah, I would definitely recommend using these guys. These guys are quite similar to the Agrianian Axemen mercenary units that I praise so much, that I consider to be one of the most cost-effective mercenary units in the game. And those guys can rack up anywhere between 500 to 600 kills in a 20 versus 20 battle. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Scythian settlers could achieve the similar numbers. However, moving up to the next and final unit in our melee roster, we have the Thorax Swordsmen, and of course, without doubt, these guys are unlocked during the Thorax reforms. They're fairly typical thorax swordsman unit that is available to all of the other Hellenic and successor factions. They have a good melee attack of 14, good melee defense of 10. Their weapon damage is a little bit low, if I have to be honest here. It's only at 27, so I wouldn't really recommend these units. However, they are not entirely a bad melee unit. They are pretty mediocre, or slightly above mediocre in my opinion. They do have good armor at 38 and a single javelin, so that's also helpful. However, apart from that, nothing much to see over here. Quite generic unit, but of course they will fulfill all of your requirements for melee units. Moving on to the next section, we have our spear units, and the very first unit we have are the Bactrian levies. These are 300 men strong. They come from Pop 3 and they have really poor stats in my opinion. 6 melee attack and 12 melee defense is just terrible for a spear unit. I mean, I'm not so troubled by the melee attack. It is the melee defense that bothers me, because as a spear unit you typically want to have at least about 17 to 18 melee defense, otherwise they're pretty much useless, considering most of your melee units have about the same melee defense. So as a spear unit you definitely want more melee defense. However, that being said and done, their weapon damage is also pretty bad. It's only at 23. Their bonus versus cavalry and elephants is also pretty bad for a spear unit. It's only 13, which means you won't be getting any significant buff to their melee attack nor their weapon damage, as opposed to, of course, some of the whopping bonuses available to the Bactrian assault infantry. Next up, we have the Indian levy spearmen. Now, these guys are just marginally better or worse in comparison to the Bactrian levies. The only thing they have going on for them is that they come from the 4th class population. They don't really have a lot of good bonuses versus large units such as cavalry and elephants, so they're not really all that great. However, coming from the 4th class population, you could find some purpose for them in your campaign if you're looking to preserve the more important and scarce elite, as well as warrior population, or rather Pop 1 and Pop 2. Moving up to the next unit, we have the Turius Spears. Now these guys are unlocked obviously during the Turius reforms. They have 20 armor. They come from the 3rd class population, and now we're starting to see some decent melee defense in our spear units at 17. A decent bonus versus cavalry and elephants. Their weapon damage is still, however, quite low at 26, but they are fairly regular Turius spear units, and you'll find this for most part of the game. Most factions have pretty similar Turius units, with the exception of Sparta, which actually has poor Turius units, and in fact those units even come from Pop 2 to make matters worse. Next up, we have the Bactrian infantry. Now these guys are slightly better than your Turius spears. They do come from, I believe, the 2nd class population unit. However, regardless of which population class they come from, they're not all that much better in comparison to your Turius spears. They do have better weapon damage, but their melee stats, as far as melee attack and melee defense is concerned, is pretty much the same. They do have slightly more armor. They are missing that ammunition, however, but what they do have is that defensive formation, and when you kind of activate the defensive formation, they do get a lot of improved stats, such as bonus versus cavalry elephants, and of course their armor gets bumped up all the way to 40. So these guys are quite good at tanking missile damage, as well as you can even use your Turius spears should you choose to do so. However, that being said and done, let us move on to the next section, which is pretty much going to talk about the phalanx units available to the Bactrian faction. And the first unit we have over here is the Greek colonist units. These guys come from the 2nd class population. They are fairly generic Pop 2 hoplite unit with 7 melee attack, 15 melee defense, which is quite average in my opinion. Their weapon damage is at 26, which isn't all that great, but once again it's very average and standard for a Pop 2 hoplite unit. Their armor, once again, very standard average. So I would just say the only thing different about most Pop 2 hoplites is their appearance. As you can see, this unit has a bit of Bactrian elements going on for it. However, next up we have the Macedonian settlers. Now these guys are quite good pikemen, and they are actually on an equal footing to the bronze shield pikemen. They have a melee attack of 9, a melee defense of 10. overall weapon damage of 26, and an armor of 30. So these guys are your early bronze shield pikemen that is available for the Bactrian roster. However, once you hit the thorax reforms, you get access to the Macedonian settlers, which are basically the thorax variant of its predecessor, and they do have slightly better stats: 11 melee attack, 13 melee defense, which is actually very good, overall weapon damage of 27, and an armor of 35. Now, these guys are comparable to your thorax bronze shield pikemen, just in the same way as these guys are comparable to your bronze shield pikemen. However, finally we have the Yavanna Guard, and I'm not going to go much into this unit because it's pretty much the same unit as your general's unit. It does come from the population class 1, so I would be very careful using these units, especially since you want to preserve your population 1 for your more important cavalry units, as we will discuss later on during this guide. In the next section, we are going to talk about our missile units that we have available to us. We do have the Bactrian Javelin Men. These guys come from the 3rd class population. They're not a very good unit in my personal opinion. I mean, they're very generic in terms of their missile capabilities, but in terms of their melee abilities, they are fairly useless. Melee attack of 3, melee defense of 3, a weapon damage of 17. That's probably some of the worst stats I have ever seen in the game as far as melee stats are concerned. Moving up to the next unit, we have the Bactrian Archers. Pretty much the same as your Bactrian Javelin Men. They have very average, or I would even say below average archer stats as far as missile stats are concerned. And to make matters worse, they even have horrible melee stats with only 19 weapon damage and 5 melee attack and 2 melee defense. So these guys will absolutely be shredded in melee. So not a very good unit in my opinion, but they also come from the population class 3. Next up we have the Bactrian Slingers. Now these guys are pretty average as well. Same thing as the archers, so I'm not going to go and talk much about these guys. Pretty bad at melee. Use them purely as missile units if you do decide to go with these missile units. Next up we have the Greco-Bactrian Peltas. Now here's where things start to get a little bit better, not necessarily quite a lot better. These guys have a little bit of armor at 15, pretty generic missile capabilities, and their melee attack and defense is fairly respectable for a missile unit, but it's not anything fancy like the Gallic skirmishers or the Iberian skirmishers, for example. But these guys are definitely better than your other options available to you, and I believe these guys also come from the 3rd class population. So yeah, they could be worth it in my opinion. Next up we have the late Peltas, and these guys are pretty much just an upgrade of the earlier Peltas. They do have much better stats, 20 armor, which is quite good. Their missile damage is slightly higher. They do have good melee attack and a very good melee defense at 14. As you can see, these Bactrian Peltas have even better melee defense than your Bactrian Levies, who only have 12 melee defense. So these guys are quite good, and if you do like that skirmisher kind of playthrough, then I would recommend getting these guys as your skirmisher kind of a unit. And next up we have the Grecian Settlers. Now these guys are without doubt your best archer unit, and that is because they have 18 melee damage, which is above average for a archer unit, and 4 of which is actually armor piercing. So these guys are really good against armored opponents. They have 9 shots per minute, which is actually significant because on average most archers have about 6 to 7 shots per minute, so they are well above that number. Apart from that, they do have 15 armor, so they can go toe to toe with enemy missile units quite well, and they do have decent melee stats as well, and their weapon damage is not all that bad at 26, especially considering it's a missile unit. And finally we have regarding the Grecian Archers, they do come from population class 2, so keep that in mind. And finally we have the Mauryan Longbowmen. Now these guys come from the population class 4. They come from your Buddhist chain building, as you have seen with all of our other Mauryan units. And these guys are similar to the Mauryan Longbowmen in that they have excellent range for an archer unit. They have 215 range, which means they are really long range archers. and in fact the best ranged archers in the game. Their range is actually comparable to the best slinger units such as the Balearic slingers as well as the Rhodian slingers in the game. These guys are quite good, however they don't have the same missile damage as your Cretan archers. They do have good armor at 20, decent melee stats, 28 weapon damage, 10 melee attack and 9 melee defense. So these guys are quite good. It's really a toss-up between these two units. In my personal opinion, I would incline towards the Cretan settlers if I am fighting against heavily armored horse archers, for example, because I do want to dish out a lot of damage, and of course the shots per minute will help me pump out more damage per second, and therefore I will be able to weaken the horse archers faster than they can release their missiles. So definitely would suggest Cretans over Mauryan longbowmen if you're going toe-to-toe with nomadic horse archer cavalry. However, if you're fighting against predominantly infantry-based armies, then the Mauryan longbowmen are quite good because they have that range, which means they can get a lot of shots off before the melee front lines clash together. So you can significantly weaken the enemy before they get into a melee engagement with your own front lines. However, moving on to the next section, we are going to talk about the the melee cavalry options available to the Bactrians. And starting up, we have the Bactrian cavalry. Now, these guys are 120 men per unit. They come from Pop 2. They have a fairly average to below average stats, so there's nothing much to discuss here. They do have good weapon damage overall at 31, 12 of which is melee armor penetration damage, which is really good. Apart from that, they do also have access to 3 javelins, which kind of makes them a bit like Tarentine cavalry, however slightly a lower tiered version of the Tarentine cavalry in my opinion. Next up, we have Bactrian nobles. Now obviously these guys come from the population class 1. They are a shock type cavalry unit with good weapon damage, really good armor at 49. Which is one of the higher armor entries for cavalry units, but their melee attack and melee defense is pretty low, so these guys are not going to be all of that kind of killing machine. They're pretty much just going to be a lot of cycle charging with this unit. So let's move on to the next unit, and we have the Greco-Bactrian noble cavalry. Now these guys are the exact same as our first general cavalry unit that I discussed about, so I won't be going into detail about these units. And followed by that, we have the Bactrian cataphracts. Now these guys are really good. They have a melee attack of 13, melee defense of 5, overall weapon damage of 32, good charge bonus at 57, and a really good armor at 47. So these guys are once again a shock cavalry unit, not a melee cavalry unit. Don't keep them in a melee engagement. In my personal opinion, use them as much as you can for cycle charging. And these guys also come from the population class 1. And finally, we have the Bactrian heavy cataphracts. Now these units are absolutely beautiful in my opinion. I mean, I love the armor, I love the purple, I love the face masks, and I love, of course, these branches that come out from the back. It's very iconic, and I actually used it in my unit card for these units. As most of you know, I do create unit cards for the Dividate Impera team. But these guys are amazing, and that is because they have really good melee attack, really good melee defense, excellent charge bonus at 67, weapon damage of 33, 13 of which is armor penetration, 56 armor, which is some of the heaviest armor in for a cavalry unit in the game. And as you can see, they are very much fully clad in plated segmented armor, and it's a really badass looking unit. However, what's the most impressive thing about this unit is that it does have the Nicaean horse breed, which is the best horse breed available to any mounted unit in the game. And when I say mounted unit, I mean cavalry as well as camels. I will include camels in this list, but of course they will not be as powerful as heavier elephants. But these guys are absolutely, powerful, heavy, and they will deal a lot of damage on the charge. So these guys are even better than the units available to your general, which I kind of feel doesn't make much sense because, I probably will convince the Dividate Impera team to include Nicene cavalry mounts for the general, because it only kind of makes sense that the general should have the best horse breed available to his faction. He wouldn't just reserve it to some of his other troops. He would kind of use it himself, especially if he's the king or the emperor of the faction. Next up we have our missile cavalry. Starting off we have the Bactrian light cavalry. These guys are 120 men strong. They come from Pop 2. Very generic missile cavalry unit. They have very poor armor, so not really good in melee engagements. They do have good speed, so they can be used to hunt down enemy missile units. And yes, nothing much else to talk about these units, so let's just hop on to the next unit. You have Bactrian horse archers. Now this is something that even the Seleucids don't have, and that is access to horse archers. Now these horse archers aren't that good in comparison to the nomadic variants. However, it's quite good considering that you at least have access to horse archers if you need to use them. And now these guys also come from the second class population. They have very average stats and low armor, so keep that in mind. But they have decent melee damage, so they can do some melee damage, but I wouldn't really bank on it considering they have really low melee defense and really poor armor. Next up we have the Greco-Bactrian cavalry. Now these guys are a missile cavalry unit. They come from the second class population, and they are horse archer lancer hybrid cavalry, and they're quite good considering they come from the second class population. They have respectable 28 armor, good melee attack, decent weapon damage at 31, good speed, and a decent missile damage as well. In my personal opinion, these guys are pretty much a very good missile cavalry unit if you need to use them. Next up we have the Yavanna heroic cavalry. Now these guys come from the first class population unit. They are a heavy skirmisher cavalry unit in that they have 41 armor. They have very good melee stats, and they have about 6 ammunition, which means they're more of a skirmisher type cavalry, and they are very similar to the Basilikoi Ile, if I pronounce that correctly, that is available to Macedon as well as the Ptolemies, in that they are a very hybrid sort of a cavalry that pretty much uses javelins and are quite good in a melee engagement. So these guys can go toe to toe in a melee engagement with other cavalry units because they have a shield and they have good melee defense stats as a result of that shield. And apart from that, they have very respectable armor at 41. And next up we have the Greco-Bactrian late cavalry, which is pretty much the third general option, so we're not going to go into that detail as much, and we are just going to move on to the final section, which is the special units. And we start off with the Indian elephants, and these elephants are pretty much very average low tier elephant units, but they do have the Indian mount entry, which means they will be better than the African elephants. And yeah, they're quite good, but of course you have access to better elephants, which is pretty much the Indian armored elephants. And now these Indian armored elephants, they are quite good. They are some of the best elephant units in the game. In my opinion, the only better elephant units than these are the Syrian elephants, which is an AOR unit present in the province of Syria and Palmyra. And of course, the elephants that are available to the Mauryan faction, and that is quite understandable since that is the main talking point when it comes to the Mauryans. But yes, that's it for the unit by unit analysis for the Bactrian roster, and as you can see, you have a lot of options for the Bactrian roster, and as such, you don't really need to rely a lot on AOR as well as mercenary units as the Bactrians, because you really have a lot of options available in your base game roster. However, without any further ado, let us hop on to section 2 of this guide, in which I will be talking about my personal recommendation for an army composition for the Bactrian army. Alright, welcome to the third section of the guide, in which we will be talking about my preference of the army composition. And as you can see, I've already made the army composition, and they are going to go up against a typical template of a Roman Marian legionary, and that's how I usually like to test out my templates. And what I would suggest is perhaps maybe get rid of a couple of these units, and could get rid of I will need 2 archers, so I want to get rid of this. I want to get a couple of elephant units. I kind of forgot about the elephant units for the Bactrian roster. However, this is the kind of army composition that I would recommend, and that is and my reasoning is elephants are really good at cavalry engagements. They can break or completely negate enemy cavalry, and your own cavalry can then sweep up the remnants of the enemy cavalry. And of course, we are going to go for the best Bactrian heavy cataphract cavalry that we have available to us. They're very slow at 5 speed, similar to your elephants. So yeah, but still, regardless, they are fast enough to do, to roam around in the battlefield and inflict some decent casualties. Next up, we have, a Bactrian peltas. Now, these guys are very situational kind of units, and that is because I would really suggest that these next 3 units, especially the Grecian settlers as well as the Bactrian peltas, are very situational. So what I mean when I say very situational is that you can actually replace these guys with pretty much anything you want. You can get some Mauryan longbowmen instead of your Grecian settlers. You can replace some of these peltas with, of course, your Bactrian assault infantry if you're up against, here we go, your Bactrian assault infantry if you're up against elephant-based armies, so that you can counter the elephants. Pretty much to do that, you charge in your own elephants, and once both elephants are engaged, just throw in your Greco-Bactrian assault infantry, and they will do, the task at hand by wiping out the enemy elephants really quickly. Next up, we have the Syrian settlers, because I just had to try out these guys. I mean, they are pretty much fantastic. I mean, you could replace them with the Greco-Bactrian assault infantry as well if you want to retain your missile capabilities. However, these guys, as I mentioned in the previous section, I feel that they are kind of like Agrarian axemen in that they are quite good at being shock and flanking type infantry units and can deal quite a lot of damage. Apart from that, they do have 4 ammunition, which means they are very much a well-rounded melee unit. Next up, we have the Turio spears. Now, the reason I get these guys is because I really want to soak up as much of the enemy missile damage as possible, and that is because I want to protect my more vulnerable pike phalangite, which is basically the Macedonian settlers, the thorax variant of the Macedonian settlers. And of course, if you're playing the early game, then you will get the early variant of the same. And lastly, we have our Pop 4 Mauryan warrior guildsmen. Now, these guys are one of the only guilds Mauryan units that I recommend in the game, apart from, of course, the Mauryan longbowmen. And the reason I recommend these guys is because they have the best defensive stats for melee unit. As you can see, even the thorax swordsmen don't have as good stats as these guys. Their weapon damage is also much better than the thorax swordsmen, and they do come from the population class 4. They have a speed of 3, which means they can move about a lot faster in the battlefield. And pretty much swords units are really good at protecting the flanks of your phalanx type units, since they don't take any penalties or as much penalties from being flanked or hit in the rear. So these guys will pretty much hold the flanks of my main phalanx infantry. So without any further ado, let us hop into section 3 of the guide, in which I will be fighting a battle against the Romans. Alright, so welcome to the battle. Let us go ahead and quickly deploy our army. Elephants, group 3 and 4. There we go. And let's get these guys to flank over here. Double tap, control up, so that they kind of spread out. Perfect. And get these guys ahead. Actually, get them out of the group. We're gonna put 1 unit here. These guys are really stretched out for some reason, but we can just hold down that control key and reduce their width. And we're gonna position them on the flanks because they are like Agrarians, so they will be able to do quite a lot of damage. And next up, we also want to reduce the width of our Mauryan warriors over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yep, I'm happy with that. We get them up over there. These guys slightly tucked in behind. And these guys are pretty much going to be my... I'm going to put the Peltas all the way back here, turn off the fire at will. These guys are going to pretty much tank all the enemy missile fire and protect my pikemen. We're going to put the Grecian archers directly behind them so that they can, you know, counter the enemy missile units. Next up, we are going to just put our elephants on either flanks. And we are going to support them with our Nicaean cavalry. And our general can be in the back, or if you'd like, you can position him on the right hand side as most Hellenic factions did. And you know what, I am going to kind of put him on that right hand side flank. It sort of kind of create a balance between this asymmetric unit of Peltas. And with that, let's just quickly move up our army as close as possible to the deployment zone and start the battle. As you can see, we are slightly off in our alignment. But we are quickly going to march into position, and I'm going to fast forward here. And now the objective of... let me just slow down the battle. The objective of this battle is to kind of bait all the enemy archers to fire at my Turios spearmen, because they do have really good defense against missile units. And I'm going to use my Grecian archers to kind of hit important enemy units. I wouldn't really bother about hitting their missile units because as Romans they have really good armor, 20 armor on the skirmisher units, and of course 38 armor on the auxiliary archers. So there's really no point. My Grecians won't be able to do enough damage on those units, so I'd rather just, you know, dedicate all of my Grecian archers to hitting their first cohort, because their first cohort is the most deadly melee unit. If you're not targeting the first cohort, then you could target the cavalry, and I would recommend that in most instances. But since we have elephants, and elephants are really good against cavalry, we don't really need to focus all that much against the cavalry. And so the plan's going to be, we're going to try to put our archers to focus fire on that first cohort. And speaking of the first cohort, I will also be needing to move my Peltas. So just let's select the Peltas towards that side, so that they can kind of hit that first cohort as well. And keep in mind their fire at will is turned off so that I can, you know, precisely micro them in order to hit that first cohort. And now as far as the flanks are concerned, we have our elephant units. And our elephants will pretty much break the charge of the enemy cavalry, which will be followed up by a charge from our own Nicaean cavalry, and that strategy works wonders. For those of you who have seen my Mauryan Let's Play series, you will see how I use that strategy to even overcome superior enemy cavalry. So definitely recommend using that strategy against the AI. However, as we slowly march up, what's eventually going to happen is I'm going to keep moving my front lines forward and forward, pretty much ignoring all missile damage that's coming towards me. And I want to get within range of the first cohorts with my Grecian archers, and that's when I am going to kind of stop my movement of the archers and focus on moving my melee infantry only. But when you do this, I would recommend keeping, and as you can see, our Turios spearmen are getting hit already. And that means it's time to kind of move up a little bit faster. And I think if I move about that much, then I should be able to get in range with my Grecian archers. And as you can see, I'm slowly getting into range with the Grecian archers. So that is good. Let us just quickly move up a little bit more. And very soon my own Turios spearmen will be able to throw their missiles at the units. And now that my Grecian archers are in place, we are going to start firing with everything we got. Make sure to turn on that guard mode so that you don't take a lot of damage. We're going to put up our units in that phalanx formation, and then we're going to select all of our melee units, which is pretty much this, and we're going to keep moving them forward. We're going to keep moving them forward because we're going to try to force the enemy into an engagement with us. We don't want to sit back and take a lot of missile damage. We want to move up as quickly as possible. And as you can see, my own phalanx units are not taking any of the missile damage, which is quite good. And when the time comes, I'm just going to retreat these guys behind. And as you can see, the enemy cavalry is starting to engage. So let's move our own cavalry into position and very quickly move our Turios spearmen behind. We don't want them to get caught in melee because they're not all that good in melee. They have served their purpose. They've taken, soaked up all of that damage. Go ahead, reposition our, and now charge with our Nicaean cavalry. Go ahead, keep charging, move our other Nicaean cavalry around. Perfect. And now we want to keep moving up. Charge here. Let's have a quick look of what's going on here. These guys are already losing decisively. We're going to move up our missile troops. As you can see, the first cohort has already taken a little bit of damage. Nothing too fancy, but they will pretty much take a lot more damage pretty soon. As you can see, they are now starting to fall because pretty much we have dealt with their armor. And yeah, they will start to fall. And of course my Grecians are doing a lot of damage, which means I can move my Peltas around. I can begin my flanking maneuvers on this side, quickly get my cavalry to target their own cavalry. Go ahead, keep charging. And as you can see, we're pretty much wiping out all of their support troops. And here we have our Agrianian type axemen, which are not really Agrianians, but they have similar stats. So I'm going to keep calling them Agrianians for that reason. And one of the things I do notice is that, you know, when enemy starts to rout like this, they're still routing, they're not completely broken or shattered. A lot of people try to chase them. And the reason I don't chase them is because why do I need to? I can pretty much use my units to target units that are engaged in the battle and get them out of the battle, rather than, you know, go on a wild goose chase to you know, deal with these units. These units will return back. As you can see, this cavalry unit is now wavering, which means soon enough it will get the ability to return into the fight. And when it does return, I will be ready. I mean, just look at what's going on over here. I have 4 cataphract units and 2 elephant units, so I have 0 problems dealing with them should they return. However, let's continue the battle. And now we can start throwing in our javelins into that first cohort. These guys can move even closer over here, get in our Agrianians to attack over here. Now these 2 cavalry units can go ahead and charge over there. We have a couple more cavalry units. We're going to get them out over here. And the main focus is, of course, we're going to see how quickly these guys rack up kills. And as you can see, 36 already. Meanwhile, over here, just look at that first cohort. It's getting absolutely demolished. Our Mauryan infantry on the flanks are doing quite well. And go ahead and keep charging at this unit. And now that our elephants are in position, go ahead, keep charging with this unit. Get our elephants to charge their general. Great. And you can just hold down the control key and click on the unit flags to select multiple units. And I find that to be one of the most cleanest ways of going about it. And once you actually have dealt with the enemy cavalry, I would recommend selecting both of your elephant units and grouping them into a single group. And as you can see, their first cohort is absolutely demolished. So I'm just going to switch my javelins to the next unit. Keep moving my elephants out, and as you can see, these guys are still racking up a lot of kills. Let's have a look at the other guys. 21, not too bad. Can slowly issue orders to our own pike units to start attacking. Go ahead, charge. And now, since the general is anyways moving in our direction, I can intercept and get him out of the fight as quickly as possible. These guys have expended all of their ammunition so they can get involved in the fighting, and as you can see, pretty much completely dealt with the entire enemy. So we can move our general up. Actually, he has been fairly inactive during the whole battle. We can use him to use his ammunition. Get our cavalry back. Get out. And as you can see, it's just a mass rout now. There's pretty much nothing these guys can do. And there we go. It's quite an easy battle. It's going to be a very decisive victory, as you will see. And there we go. that, we have won the battle. So let's hop on to the end screen and basically analyze how we performed during this battle. Alright, so as you can see, it was a decisive victory. I didn't kill a lot of Romans, and that's because most of them were routed fairly quickly and they took huge morale damage. I did get rid of their entire cavalry, some of their spear as well as missile units, and the only reason I didn't kill many Romans is because I ended the battle prematurely instead of hunting down all of the enemy units that were routing. This number can be a lot more, but as you can see, as far as losses are concerned, we took minimal losses. Our first class units such as the Nicene cavalry took almost no casualties, and that is because our elephants prevented them from doing so. And as you can see, their own cavalry was so heavily countered. Meanwhile, their first cohort did only 15 kills, and that is because we focused fired on them. And as you can see, our Cretan archers didn't do a lot of kills, but they significantly weakened the first cohort. And of course, our Bactrian pelters, topped that off with 161 kills on the first cohort, which is pretty amazing. Next up, our Turios spearmen. They didn't do a lot of kills because we used them in a very defensive way. We used them to soak up the enemy missiles, and that's pretty much the the missiles of these two units, which totals up to about 90 or 88 to be precise. But most of it went into dealing with this third-class population Turios units, so that is pretty good. Apart from that, our pikemen, as you can see, they are fairly well preserved. Our Mauryan swordsmen actually performed quite well in holding those flanks quite defensively. I don't expect to see a lot of crazy numbers over here. But as you can see with the Syrian settlers, 146 kills on this one unit because it got into the fight a little bit earlier in comparison to this other unit. And in fact, if I kept the battle running, I'm pretty sure they could have reached about 200 to 300 if they managed to kill several of these fleeing Roman units. So they are, yes, they're quite as good as Agrarian axemen, in my opinion. Not as good as far as melee capability is concerned, but keep in mind they do have 4 javelins, so they are really good. Meanwhile, our general actually did quite less, and that's because I just microed him really badly. I could have used him to get involved in the fighting a bit more. Not in melee, but at least use his missile, his ammunition, which I kind of forgot to do. But even with that negligence, I managed to secure probably one of the best victories I have done so far in this series, and that is because the Bactrian roster, like the Seleucid roster, is incredibly powerful. However, without further ado, let us hop into section 4 of the guide, which is basically going to talk about the AOR units and, of course, the mercenary units available for the Bactrian roster that I would recommend getting. However, keep in mind that section is not going to be too elaborate or too long, because you don't really need mercenaries and AORs as Bactrians. As you can see, we have quite a wide variety of units to select from. We have literally every type of unit class and very respectable stats. So you don't really need to hire AOR units as well as mercenary units when you're playing as the Bactrians. But even so, there are some notable mentions that can perform better than your own units. And for that, we will hop on to section 4 of our guide. Alright, welcome to section 4 of the guide, and over here we will be discussing about the mercenary and AOR options for Baktria that I would personally recommend. But as mentioned in the previous sections, you don't really need these units as Baktria has one of the most solid and well-rounded rosters in game. Let's talk about the first set of provinces that are closest to your starting position. These include Baktria, Transoxania, Arya and Mara. In the provinces of Baktria and Mara, you can get access to Indian mercenary elephants. These elephants have 36 men per unit, and while they might be marginally inferior to Indian armored elephants of your Bactrian roster, they are available at the start of the game and can be used until you can recruit your own elephants from your tier 3 barracks or stables after unlocking the building via your technology tree. In the province of Mara, you can also get access to Mauryan war elephants. These elephants have 48 men per unit and is the equivalent of the Mauryan tower elephants, and are better than the Indian armored elephants of the Bactrian roster. However, they have a campaign cap of 4, so you can recruit them for the army of your faction leader as they are of superior quality. You can also get access to Indo-Hellenic Thurio spears, which are similar to your own Thurio spear unit, with the added benefit that they come from the 4th class population. You can also recruit the Sreni mercenary infantry, which is the equivalent of the Mauryan Indian guildsmen, with 15 melee attack, 35 armor and an overall weapon damage of 36, a whopping 11 of which is melee armor penetration. These units are very good shock infantry and even have good bonus versus elephants. Meanwhile, in the provinces of Arya and Transoxiana, there isn't anything worth mentioning that can supplement the Bactrian army. The next set of provinces should be attainable before your Turius reforms depending on the direction of your early expansion. These include Parthia, Carmania, Chorasmia, Parsus and Scythia. Of these, only 3 are worth mentioning. In the province of Carmania, you can access the Indian mercenary elephants, while in Parthia, you can get access to 2 of the best mercenary and AOR cavalry units in game. These are the Parthian hired cataphracts and the Nicaean cavalry. Both of these units are shock cavalry with 120 men per unit, amazing stats including the Nicaean mount entity. They are slightly superior to your own Bactrian cataphracts as they not only have more men but better stats overall. Finally, we have the province of Scythia, and over here you can get access to the Scythian mercenary armored horse archers. This unit has 120 men per unit and is a horse archer lancer cavalry hybrid with a heavy mount entity that is even better than the Maripos entry. The next set of provinces are a little bit further away from your starting position and should be attainable only in the late middle game just before your Thorax reforms. These include Syria, Palmyra, Bosphorus and Galatia at Cappadocia. In Syria and Palmyra, you can get access to Syrian armored elephants, which is slightly better than the elephants available in your roster. While in Galatia and Cappadocia, you can get access to the Galatian mercenary spearmen. These have 300 men in the unit, and like the Indo-Hellenic Thurio spears, are a viable alternative to your Thurio spears that come from the 4th class population. You can also recruit Galatian chosen swordsmen, which are legionary-like units with amazing melee stats of 15 melee attack, 12 melee defense, 35 armor and 32 weapon damage. You can also recruit the slightly superior Galatian thorax swords, which have 15 melee attack, 12 melee defense, 41 armor and 32 weapon damage. Finally, in the province of Bosphorus, you can recruit the Scythian heavy archers. They are 175 men per unit, and stat-wise, as far as missile stats are concerned, they lie in the range between your own Cretan settlers and your Mauryan longbowmen. They have 18 missile damage and 185 range. But these units are very versatile because they also have extremely good melee stats for a missile unit, such as 9 melee attack, 35 armor and 33 overall weapon damage, 14 of which is melee armor penetration. However, due to their low melee defense of 4, I would recommend using them as flanking units once they have depleted their ammunition and obviously not as frontline units. With that being said and done, I have covered all of my personal recommendations for AOR and mercenary units for the Bactrian faction. Although keep in mind, due to the roster being so well rounded, you don't really need to recruit the aforementioned units, as they are only marginally superior than the options you already have available. While most of the factions require mercenaries and AOR units to supplement their deficiencies, as Baktria you will only need them for marginally better stats if you are looking to min-max your army. Alright, welcome to the 5th and final section of this guide, in which we will be going through my personal recommendations for the army tradition, as well as the general skills that I find to be the most useful for the Bactrian faction. So beginning with the general skills, we want to firstly get the military logistician, as this does give a -15 upkeep for all land units. And then we also want the military conscriptor, because it does give that. increased 15% replenishment rate for all units, which I find to be a must-have regardless of whatever faction you're playing as, because not only will you have cheaper units, which means you can field more elite units, but at the same time you can replenish your units really quickly, which means you can expand really fast as you don't have to wait for your army to get back to full strength for 4-5 turns. Most of you following any of my Let's Play series will know that I am able to replenish within 1 to 2 turns and continue my conquest and keep pushing that momentum, and that is primarily due to these first 2 skills. Next up, as Baktria, since you do have a well-rounded roster, I would suggest getting every single skill under the Ferocious Warrior tree. And that basically means the Trained Swordsman, which improves your melee infantry, your Experienced Archers, which improve your missile infantry, your Skilled Cavalrymen, which improves your cavalry, and finally what we need as the Bactrians is to improve our mobility, because while the Bactrians have a lot of versatility in their roster, I did notice that many of their elite units, like their cataphract units, their elephants of course are going to be slow. They're going to have 5 speed each, and even their horse archers quite slow. So what you want to do is you actually want to get some movement speed bonuses, and for that you can get Drill Master, which gives you +6 movement speed, and then you can go for the Commander of Men, and under the Commander of Men you can go for the Booming Voices, which gives you an additional 9 movement speed, and with that you will have an incredibly mobile Bactrian army with your hoplites moving at speed 3, and your cataphracts can eventually go as high up as to speed 7 or even 8 after you build the stables, which will give an additional 20% movement speed to your cavalry, in addition to the 15% we got from the general skills. So that's a total of 35%, and if we take 30% of 5, which is their base movement speed, that's about 2, so you will get around 7 movement speed for your cataphracts, which is quite good because 7 is the average speed of cavalry units, which means your super heavy Nicaean cataphracts will be able to catch up with any of the medium cavalry that's present in the game. However, they will not be able to catch up to the light cavalry such as light horse archers and of course a lot of the lighter skirmish cavalry. However, they will be able to give good chase to medium cavalry unit, which is quite substantial considering they are a super heavy cavalry unit. However, that being said and done, let us quickly have a look at the army traditions that we can get as the Bactrians. And straight off the bat, you want to go for the Stratego Spears, which gives increased melee attack for all your spear armed units. And as Baktria, you won't be having a lot of spear armed units. However, there's not many options, and after that you want to go for the formidable spearmen, as well as get that accomplished skirmishers. And now these 2 skills unlock future bonuses such as the Cavalry Masters, which improves your cavalry, and also the Hounds of Molossus, which gives increased melee attack for all units. So this is quite powerful as it applies across the entirety of your army, so you definitely want to get that. Then you want to focus on the Polis Defenders, which gives you some melee defense for your spear-armed infantry as well as some morale bonuses. You want to go down the Stalwart City Defenders tree so that you can get the Indomitable Hoplites, which further boosts your spear-armed units, giving increased melee attack as well as melee defense, totaling to 6 melee attack and 9 melee defense. And finally, you can even upgrade this eventually. And finally, you want to get the Frontier Garrison, as there are no other better options available. And with the Frontier Garrison, you will get increased campaign map movement range, which is quite helpful in a campaign, especially when you have a larger empire and you need to get your armies around quickly. Finally, you want to get the the special army tradition that is unlocked at rank 6 of your army. And this is the Veteran Hoplites, which give 3 melee attack skill for all Hellenic infantry unit, as well as 3 melee defense skills for all Hellenic infantry units, which is incredibly powerful. As you can see, we have our Greek colonists over here, and we have a Bactrian javelin men. And currently the melee attack is 4 and 5, and over here we have 10 and 23. But by getting this it will apply to all Hellenic units. So let's just go ahead and get that and have a quick look at what it is. And as you can see, it is 11 and 23, and over here we have 5 and 5. So it's very powerful. Of course, these javelin units, as mentioned in the roster section of the guide, they're not really that good in melee. However, if you're looking at some of the other units such as the Bactrian assault infantry and so forth, those army traditions can really pay off. And with that, I think I am done with this guide and the factional overview. And so I thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you like the video, then like the video, and don't forget to subscribe if you are interested for more. Peace and love.